Hey everybody, welcome along for another episode of Unfiltered. John Marchant from KipperTie, my colleague Bryce Munn joining me yet again. And today, not going to do any show and tell, but I wanted to cover something that I know probably everybody has been going on and on about, but it's really close to us and really affecting us, and that's to talk about AI in our industry. Seeing it really from both perspectives. So for anybody who doesn't know, at KipperTie, the company runs in two halves. We do film and video production, predominantly for high-end corporate clients, using a lot of the same gear that we produce accessories for with the KipperTie products line. So we see things from a manufacturing perspective and a physical hardware design perspective, but then also from a creative perspective, which is the side that Bryce sits on. So, I mean, just for a grounding in this, it's not like anybody is unaware at this point that ship sailed quite a while ago. The biggest thing that I'm hearing from people at the moment is actually getting into the ethical arguments and the practical arguments about when to use, should you use, should it even exist?
That's it.
I mean, what are you seeing? What are you hearing, either from clients or on socials and that kind of thing?
It's a real mix. We deal with clients of all sizes, all scales, and it certainly seems like the lower end of the market is all for it. Absolutely, it's a great tool to use. There aren't much ethical concerns raised at that point.
Yeah, absolutely. People
can be a little bit worrying.
Grab what they can and go, oh, this is great, and let's not worry about that too much. Yeah,
exactly. And then there's some of the work we do for some clients who expressly rule it out, and it's as simple. It seems like it's a black and white thing of either people are all for it and use it, or don't touch it because legally we don't know where we stand. Yeah,
I mean, that's absolutely the way I've seen it in terms of people's personal opinions as well. It can be really polarizing. People are huge enthusiasts and are into it in almost a fanatical sense of, I must explore this just for exploring AI's own sake. Or people have a philosophical stand against it and are like, well, this is trash. Why would I have anything to do with it? It's there are a bunch of very valid concerns, depending on what kind of category of stuff we're talking about. For me, one of the key areas where I think maybe my opinion differs from some is around how we perceive AI and how it's learned or has been taught what it knows. So there's a factor in how human beings operate, which we've got a really bad track record for, and that is in recognizing the personhood of people who are not like us.
Yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, explorers, conquerors from the West and from in all sorts of directions in history have done this. They have gone to other places and seen other people with differences, however minor in some cases, and not been willing to accept that those are people.
Exactly. They
are somewhat less than us. They are less important than us. I can exploit them. I can take whatever. We've got a really bad track record for that. And I honestly feel like although, generalized kind of use of AI doesn't represent a consciousness at this point, it has a huge number of parallels, and not recognizing the way in which it has been taught to be in any kind of a parallel with the way in which a person is taught or learns produces quite a big problem. My daughters love art, for example, and particularly Lily loves working with acrylics, does some great work in that. And a while back, she was studying the work of a lovely British artist called Molly Benson, produces some really fantastic bits of work. She'd been studying these and created some of her own. And then when her teacher said to her, do you want to show some of what you've done for this event? And she was really reticent about it. It was like, well, yeah, but I'm just regurgitating what this lady has done. It's not really me. I'm just learning to, to physically work with the paint and to get the, so
Exactly.
she felt weird about it. So I actually reached out to, the wonders of social media, found the artist, spoke to her and said,
Brilliant.
my daughter's been, looking at her work, been inspired by it. She's made some direct copies. She's made some stuff inspired.
Paid homage to.
Paid homage to, yeah, exactly. And actually she was really gracious and said, that's fantastic. I love that she's inspired by it. Yes, I can see it's, obviously you can see it's very derivative of it,
Yeah.
but
It's not like she's signing them with her name.
she's
at the
not
end of the
signing
day.
with, yeah, exactly. And there's also, again, there's a degree of very arguable fair use in education and in the sort of learning process for learning's sake. Now, the problem that occurs is in a nominal however many years' time of development, when my daughter goes out into the world and perhaps, with the connections that she has through my work in this industry, maybe she's working as a designer, an artist or similar, and in the back of her mind as those inspirations that she took from carefully studying an artist's work.
Yeah.
Now, obviously every artist does this. It's what you do. You learn from those examples and you learn from that stuff. And
that's not just art as in art, it's music.
no, absolutely.
and
It's
culture,
across every facet of culture.
Yeah.
It's a long, slow process. And I think that's about the only part where it feels as though repurposing and relearning existing content created by others and using it for financial gain, for your employment and so on, it's being shortcut by AI. And it feels as though that barrier to entry of putting the long, hard hours in is, in a sense, what a lot of people object to, because it feels as though something is being cheated.
Yeah.
And it's actually very hard to articulate that without it basically becoming a kind of hard argument to settle.
Yeah, exactly. You say, why is a human doing it better than a computer? A human can know what sources they're pulling from. They know the process they're following.
Yes.
And I think
Yeah,
with
that's
AI,
it.
it's a lack of accountability on that front, isn't it?
That's an interesting part of it, because if we're talking about image generation, some of the telltales are, the kinds of things that, the people creating the AIs are tuning this kind of stuff out. But for example, generative AI producing images that contain watermarks, for example, clearly showing
Says a lot
that
about where the
the
thoughts
training
come from.
data was not, but that is really, again, if you were a human or an intelligence studying artwork, these are grey areas. Is it okay to look at images on the internet that you haven't paid any royalty for and take inspiration from them?
Yeah.
Or should you be buying a textbook and paying the art? I mean, it's arguable that you should be,
Absolutely.
but it's also practically not how the world works.
Yeah.
So, I do think that we're in a difficult place where the onus is on us to try and use it appropriately.
I
But
think openness and honesty are very important on that front.
yes,
In terms of being
Yeah, exactly.
very clear with our clients about when it's being used,
yeah,
and making sure there's that mutual understanding of how it's used.
yes,
And
yeah,
then-
absolutely.
Yeah, there's an element, certainly on our side of the business, where we reach a point in a lot of projects and stop using it.
Yes.
We'll use it for the preparation and the planning, pre-visualization, all those backwards and forwards with the client about agreeing visual looks and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But then there reaches a point where we hand over to human work.
Yes, exactly. And it's interesting because the big scheme of things, the grand output, is very easy to understand, very easy to see. If you take a completely AI-generated image, it's usually very possible to, people are very familiar with the styles already. They can see it, they can understand it, and they develop a feel for it. And the same applies to text. I wrote an email just the other day and Sarah actually said to me, "Did the robot write that for you?" I was like, "No, I wrote that." And she was like, "Oh, you wrote like the robot."
Yes.
That was the way she put it.
It's got a feel already.
Yeah, and it's like, okay, well, actually, all I was doing was writing in quite a proper manner for a particular thing, and I happened to steer into that style. But it shows that people do have an understanding of what those styles are. The tricky bit is the lower level usages. The fact that this type of help that we're receiving is now going to start to rear its head in simple things like correcting spelling, correcting grammar.
Yeah.
When do you shift from correcting grammar to suggesting a better way to have written a sentence?
Exactly.
When do you shift from a color picker tool that lets you go, oh, the color of the background, I'll color in the correct color and erase an object, through to a cloned stamp. I'm going to take pieces of this image and replace pieces of it, through to a generative fill.
Exactly.
And smart fills in between. There's been this kind of progressive grey area of use of what can't necessarily be seen as a big AI, but it's an assistive tool.
Exactly.
And it's interesting actually to see that a lot of the bigger tools are starting to take steps back in that direction as well. So Midjourney, for example, for a long time was capable of generating fantastic looking, stylish images, but very little you could do to edit them and be specific with them. And they've started to work on that and add the ability to edit and work on specific areas, blend images, make minor adjustments and that kind of thing. All of which are actually pulling back closer to what you might do in Photoshop or similar.
Precisely.
So yeah, it makes good sense that you want to disclose when you're using AI.
But at what point? And similarly,
where's the line? That's going to get harder.
Yeah, absolutely. When we have clients where we've signed a contract saying we're not using AI on a project.
Yes.
Spell check, grammar, stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean,
is that
absolutely
really AI? And also, how do you define AI when a lot of certainly software applications will use it as a marketing term to say this is an AI, and
absolutely,
really procedurally, it's not doing what an AI should do.
Yeah, exactly. No, I mean, it's obviously a buzzword at this point, and there is AI tacked onto all sorts of things that are not using any kind of either generative or large language model or other, related concepts. They're simply clever algorithms, and a clever algorithm is, not really the same thing. But again, we get into this blurry area of at what point does a smart algorithm become AI, and at what point does an AI become a generalized AI, which is a point we're not really at, but it's getting closer. ChatGPT is the go-to for a lot of people at this point, and right now it will write, it will create images, it will process files, it will write code. It will do a huge, broad range of things, and it has access to the internet. It has the ability to remember what it's been talking to you about.
To cite sources,
sources,
very valuable.
Yeah. So there are a lot of ways in which that's becoming closer and closer to a general intelligence. There are still weirdnesses and gotchas with that. And I feel like the bugs are getting squashed here and there. But I mean, a classic one recently that did the rounds on social media was asking AI how many R's are there in strawberry, which is just a gap in the way that large language models tend to process. I know it's something that you've looked into was trying to automate some of the processes around transcription and producing subtitling and other kind of procedural parts of the work.
But the AI is too smart, it does too much, and you can't pare it back and say, don't edit this, or
Yeah.
very specifically, don't change any of these characters, just put line breaks in and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's it.
It's a too simple task for it.
Yeah, the irony of it is that in those cases, the AI is better placed to write straightforward code that does a task than it is to do the task itself, even though the task is simpler than writing the code as far as a human would be concerned.
Almost like the AI is sat there going, this is above my pay grade.
Yeah,
or, this is below my pay grade.
yeah,
This is donkey work. I'm not touching this.
Yes.
I'll make you a tool to do it.
But it's the same issue that you have in generative images. That if you ask for a completely plain square red block, just give me a white screen, nothing on it. It doesn't know what to do. It's built out of it's derived from complexity. So complexity is what it outputs. Asking for simplicity in generative AI is asking for trouble. It doesn't like to be concise. It doesn't like to be, and these are all deficiencies to an extent. But there are also things where, if we're talking about doing what I think is inevitable at this point, which is having to stay abreast of these technological advances so that you know where you stand. These are gaps that you need to know how to jump across. On the product design side of things, there are places where generative concepts have existed prior to kind of large language module, the explosion that came along with OpenAI. So, for example, if you have two load-bearing objects and you want to connect them together, or you want to apply a load from one place to another, a number of different CAD systems will simulate and generate geometry that fulfills the task in an efficient way. And usually it's done in what appears to be quite an organic way. And you end up with multiple choices, very much like when you put a prompt into an image generator.
Exactly.
It's going, how about these? But they all have a very distinct feel. None of them look like the part that an engineer would have designed. They all look like what the computer would have imagined, and they need...
And I suspect are identifiable between different software as well.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, you can spot when somebody has been using Autodesk Fusion, for example. You can spot when somebody has been using Inventor. You can see those kind of trademarks in exactly the same way that you can look at a generated image and go, oh yes, that one's from DALL-E, that one's from Midjourney.
Exactly.
They have their kind of inherent feels. So I think for me, the place where AI feels like people are arguing against it least is in its use as a resource to do assistive processes. And a key one of those is actually encoding. Now, I don't write code. I have in the past, a long, long time ago, and I know enough to fudge it and get by. And I know you're kind of in a similar kind of category of just kind of, I can, it's being brave enough to go, I'll bash together a script somehow.
I understand the logic, but I don't understand the syntax. And that's where AI goes, well,
exactly.
I'll deal with that part.
Yeah, so the syntax is unarguable. And, if you write code in the modern world, one misplaced semicolon, one lost comma, and everything's dead.
Which is great when you're a creative and therefore a dyslexic.
That's it. So these things don't line up well. But AI for assistive processes in coding works incredibly well. And it's actually very much of an enabler without necessarily some of the same stigma attached to pure creative work. Now, obviously, coding is creation. It's not a non-creative thing just because it's technical. But equally, the coding community, I know, are much more willing and much happier to say, well, I just grab these pieces of code. This is how I make stuff. And you stand on the shoulders of giants, basically.
Exactly.
There are a few brilliant people in any given incredibly fine niche who are pushing the boundaries, and everybody else says, great, I'll take that library, that's brilliant. Oh yeah, I'll take that function, that works a treat. And it doesn't have quite the same kind of ethical approach. Not that it's unethical, but that it has much more of a collaborative and specifically, the concept of open source comes from code as opposed to from art.
At the end of the day,
in a lot of cases.
It kind of feels like it's problem solving and everybody's helping each other solve problems.
Yes.
Whereas with generative stuff on like the creative side of things, you're not really doing that. You're coming up with artwork.
Yes, indeed. And in a lot of cases, the thing that people are concerned about is you're cutting out a job. You're preventing somebody from earning their living doing, and not only that, but you're taking from content they created, regurgitating it, and taking their paycheck.
Yeah.
There are some minor cases where I think that might be true. The vast majority of usage, though, it seems to me, is purely recreational. There are minor cases where that's not true. But I think if you were to look at the proportion of generative AI images produced versus, those that have been demonstrably taken from content that it shouldn't have had access to and then marketed for gain, I don't think it is hugely destructive in that sense. And it does feel like it's one of those things where we just need to add the string to our bow and say, okay, we understand how to do this. And it's on us to have these kinds of discussions and basically say, okay, well, what are the ethics here? What should I be considering?
And every production house, every company will have they'll land at a different conclusion about that.
Yeah,
and that's
absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, indeed. No, I mean, it is something that I think the consumer has to be aware of as well. I stumbled across a website earlier today who produce gigantic globes, which is
random,
as straightforward as it sounds. They make massive physical globes of the Earth.
Okay.
Yeah. A partner company or parallel company of theirs seemed to produce geodesic domes. Only when I looked into it, it's just a whole load of AI images of geodesic domes.
Oh.
There may be one actual one, I'm not sure.
Okay.
And it's not apparent at first glance. It's only if you're fairly familiar and you start to go, hang on, that's a beautiful picture. It looks a bit too, hang on, why are there two versions of this and yet the house is different? And, the giveaways. So, people are going to use it in unscrupulous ways, but then people will use Photoshop and Illustrator and InDesign in unscrupulous ways. People will make unscrupulous HTML websites.
It drops the barrier to entry, which is where I think the problem lies with that.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, one of the other places that I just wanted to bring up as well, because we've been talking about code, writing, imagery. Audio is actually one of the places where we've seen huge advances as well.
Absolutely.
There's always been a category of audio change requested in the edit where we've had to say, sorry, there's nothing we can do about that. Can you take the echo out? No, you can't take echo out. Can you get rid of that background noise? No, you can't get rid of background noise. What are you talking about? These were, historically, those were just impossible asks. And it feels like we vaulted past that somehow and straight into... can we replace the section where the guy says this and change it to saying that? Can we replace the entire voice with a different accent? Can we change it? And it's accelerated beyond belief, really. Yeah,
alarmingly so. And I think that's, for us, it's where most of our ethical conversations happen. Because it's where, right now, you can most believably change what somebody says. And, for some applications, that's fine. If that's a public figure, and you have freedom of what you can make them say, it's really concerning.
Absolutely, yeah. And it's also I mean, I know we've talked about it quite a bit in terms of how to enact some kind of control for this and how even to broach the subject with clients, because not everybody is tech savvy in this way.
Exactly.
You put the scenario out there, you're cutting something for a large corporate, and the CEO misspeaks in the one good take and says million, not billion, or some minor thing like that. That million billion, you could seamlessly fix that.
Yeah.
Even with relatively simple tools. We're not talking about going all the way to
It doesn't take an expert. It's the whole
That's
barrier.
very
Also,
simple.
They're not expensive tools. They're not really pricey
we're
licenses.
talking, $5 a month subscriptions, aren't we? It's this is not again, low barrier to entry. So that correction feels like a slam dunk. It feels like the kind of thing that an editor who maybe hasn't been brought up to speed with everything might just go, I can fix that, don't worry, I can fix that. I'll save the day. Maybe no one will even know. And that's the scary part. Is that is the beginning of slippery slope, which is why we've talked about how do we bring that topic up? What are people comfortable with? Because there's an argument for effectively saying, well, any interview that you do where there might be a need for changes, let's ensure that we record, instead of multiple takes to cover the different changes, why don't we record sample voice that we can use to create the changes? That's a practical use, and done with everybody involved having proper consent might be quite an appropriate way of approaching it. It does then raise the question, do we need the script?
Exactly.
Or do we just need a sample of the voice and we'll write the script? It's all of these things have their own individual tipping points where it goes from being very easy to make the argument to feeling wrong or just downright being wrong. And where it tips over varies by subject, it varies by situation. It's a really tricky time to be working, I think, with this stuff happening in parallel.
Absolutely, yeah. Especially for legal departments.
Yeah, absolutely.
Don't envy them.
No, quite. I mean, the easy answer, like you said, is that there are a lot of people out there who are taking the blanket approach. Just no.
Yeah. Big corporates. That's straightforward, simple answer.
Yes, exactly. The issue is going to arise, of course, where that type of processing and that type of stuff happens either out of your sight or without your consent or in some way without your knowledge. A lot of these things can be under the skin. I mean, what's the noise reduction algorithm on your fancy, expensive camera?
Exactly.
Is it using AI? Is it recognizing a face and processing it? Is there some piece of software that you're using that does the same? It's softening the skin tones. How is it doing that? How does it know it's a person? Where is it processing the data? Is it doing it locally? Is it doing it in the cloud? I mean, all of these are the types of areas where we've got to think really hard about it. I know there are people who might perhaps seem extreme who want to be effectively kind of ring fencing processes like this. Where everything is a subscription, everything is online. We are vulnerable to other people's concept of what's appropriate, other people's terms of service.
That's it.
And you want to lean into the practicality, but I can easily see that on the production side for our business, there could be customers who might say, well, we don't want footage stored on this internet connected system, for example. There are sensitivities that would be too great. It's the kind of thing that we've really got to keep a close eye on. It is emotive as well. I wonder whether it's a bubble that's going to burst. I mean,
it's a good question.
Is it just a case that this is going to be, we'll just get to a point where we're like, okay, saturation point.
Yeah.
Are we at that, or
approaching? I think anything that escalates as quickly as this has is going to, it reaches a point, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that there is not just an industry specific, but a general public backlash against certain parts of that. Not least because people use AI as a buzzword and as a marketing tool, and it then feels like we've had enough. It's a little bit of a parallel to how Hollywood movies are at pains to tell you how they don't use CGI these days, which, there are some fantastic pieces of content out there on YouTube. I'd encourage you to search and use the algorithm for that one. But of course, big budget movies are using CGI everywhere. They're using it invisibly, and that's
the best.
That's the best kind. But of course, they're using it. But it has a stigma, and it's not that long ago that the computer-generated visuals were exciting. And the practical miniatures were old hat. Now people wish and hope for practical miniatures.
And when they use them, they shout about them.
That's
it. Would have been the opposite. When you use CGI, you would shout about that.
That's it.
That was the impressive thing.
And so obviously people have been shouting about AI.
Yeah.
And it does feel as though maybe we're at that saturation point already, and people are starting to say, I don't want it known.
Yeah.
And that worries me because it's deceptive.
Yeah.
In the same way as, I mean, is it or is it not a harmless deception to say we used no CGI in the production of this film?
Exactly.
When it's demonstrably not true.
At the same time, there's almost a change happening now where, like I said, we tend to use AI in pre-visualization, and that comes in form of voiceovers and that sort of thing. And we've always been very open with clients and presented drafts and said, this bit will be swapped out. This AI element will be changed for a real
element. Placeholder for so-and-so.
Which was always an easy conversation when the AI element was a little bit bad.
Yes.
It reaches a point where having that conversation is almost like we're making a fuss over nothing, because we're presenting work which is perfectly acceptable and saying that element, we need to change that.
Yes, because we don't agree with it.
And the client's on the other end going, no, it's perfectly good. And I love it. I didn't even know until you said.
Yeah.
And that's the worrying thing. I didn't know.
Yeah, indeed.
Couldn't tell.
I mean, the standing joke for guide voiceover has always been that it ends up being one of us in the studio. I've ended up being the voice of more videos.
To the point where we now have an AIU.
Yeah, absolutely. Which is great to know. I'm glad to have been replaced by myself in that sense.
In fact, what you don't know, this is split.
I know, look, at the top of here, we said we do not do the usual gag that the whole thing was written by AI. But yeah, I do think, obviously you could say, well, if it's presenting these concerns, just don't use it. But of course, what you then take is a practical step backwards again. And, it is somewhat of the case that you need to keep your competitive edge in any
Very
business.
much so. So
if you're not doing
by
it,
the industry,
someone else will.
Yeah.
And that, it's not a good feeling. I understand how people wouldn't like to feel as though they're dragged towards something that they don't necessarily align with. I mean, my position on it as a whole, in case you haven't kind of gleaned from this, is I'm enthusiastic about it, scared of it, feel as though I need to get in control, and essentially, I want to harness the good stuff, but I really want to know where the pitfalls are. And I do think I would encourage anybody out there to do some soul searching about it, do some real thinking. What is appropriate, what is fair,
and that changes a lot as well, which is the hard thing to keep on top of. It changes. Not only does it change over time because the tools available are changing, but it also changes from project to project, where everything has a slightly different datum for the ethics and what's the process.
For me, some of it is also about, if the argument is around, have you taken a job away from somebody? Have you replaced something? Would the job have existed? Or is it now actually an enabler? So, I mean, for example, we posted a largely AI-generated reskin of a render as an image for our Black Friday sale. So that image was a product that I designed from scratch, a 3D model of it, every part of that from scratch. rendered, again, all in-house, and then used retexture function in Midjourney to put a rock texture over it, and then did some work on it from there. Added open source and license-free fonts, Photoshop work in general, but of course we flag it on Instagram as AI generation because that's it's Instagram's policy. It would be our policy to say here is something AI generated.
Absolutely.
But arguably, without all of the original input, which is entirely proprietary and ours,
and created work for people.
Yeah, that's it. Then that image couldn't have existed.
Yeah.
And also, without the ability to do that in a relatively timely way, low effort, that image would not have been a paid gig for someone.
Yeah,
there would have just been something else.
Yeah.
Nonetheless, that image, we had angry comments, we had fantastically enthusiastic comments, anywhere in between. So if nothing else, all we're proving is that AI just continues to be really divisive.
And provocative.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's arguable in the way that engagement works online that if you want to drive engagement, AI is still enough of a touchy point that it will drive engagement.
Is that why we're having this conversation now?
Surely not. We're not all about the algorithm here. We do just want to have a chat, really.
So please like, subscribe, and leave a comment.
Oh yeah, all of those fantastic YouTube things. That about wraps us up. Sorry, no show and tell of interesting things today, but that will return next time out. Leave a comment if you have more to say about this. It's a divisive one. It's interesting. It's exciting and scary in equal measure, and continues to be that way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. I'll see you again.